Every species feared the females of this alien race. Only one human walked toward them. The alarm was already blaring when I reached the observation corridor. Not the soft amber pulse of a routine containment warning, the hard red strobe, the kind that means somebody is either dead or about to be. I pulled on my jacket while running, badge slapping against my chest, boots skidding slightly on the polished floor of Station Meridian 9's diplomatic wing. Around me, beings of 6 different species were moving in the opposite direction, fast, some of them shoving past me with wide eyes and terror written plain across their faces. A Vorith guard, built like a wall and twice as decorated, was retreating at a full sprint. That alone told me everything about how bad this was. The Vorith do not run from anything. I ran toward it. The observation corridor ended in a thick transparasteel wall, floor to ceiling, behind which the containment chamber sat. Inside that chamber, a Velkari elder female was doing what she had apparently been doing for the better part of 3 days, communicating in the only language anyone had given her access to. She was dismantling the room. Not with tools, with her hands and the low crackling bioelectric field that rolled off her carapace in visible waves. The walls had deep gouges in them. A reinforced support bracket had been bent clean off its mount. She stood in the center of the destruction, 8 feet tall, armored plates across her shoulders, catching the emergency lighting, amber eyes burning with a fury so deep it looked almost like grief. My name is Dara Okafor. I am a sergeant with the Human Peacekeeping Corps, and I had been on the station for exactly 4 hours when the containment breach alert pulled me out of my bunk. I had no briefing. I had no partner. What I had was a thermos of coffee I had grabbed on the way out, and a very strong feeling that whatever was happening down that corridor, I needed to see it myself. The observation room behind the transparisteel was empty. Everyone had cleared out. On a small console near the wall, a recorded briefing was playing on a loop, clearly meant for whoever was supposed to be managing this situation. I watched about 90 seconds of it and understood the basics. The Velkari were a newly contacted species from Karath Prime. The males were diplomats, gentle, careful, well-spoken beings, who had been conducting trade negotiations with the Galactic Cooperative for 6 standard weeks. The females, however, were something the cooperative had quietly categorized as a hazard. Every species in the known cooperative produced fear-based chemical signals when threatened. Those signals, the xenobiologist believed, triggered the Velkari females into an escalation response. The more frightened the room, the more dangerous she became. 2 prior contact attempts had ended in disaster. A Vorith security unit had gone in armed and confident. They came out in pieces, not physically, but as a unit. The Synaph had sent a drone cluster. She had destroyed 11 of them in under 2 minutes. The cooperative's conclusion had been to contain and wait. Nobody had gone in. Nobody had asked her anything. I picked up my thermos, took a long sip of coffee, and looked through the transparasteel at the elder female. She was breathing hard. Her carapace rose and fell with something that looked uncomfortably like exhaustion mixed with rage. And beneath the rage, if you looked long enough, which apparently nobody had bothered to do, there was something else. Something quieter and much sadder. I grew up in a house with 3 older sisters and a mother who had raised 4 children, mostly alone after our father took a contract on the outer mining rigs. I knew what it looked like when a woman was furious because she had been dismissed. It looked exactly like this. I set down my thermos and walked to the edge of the transparasteel. She saw me immediately. Her body shifted, weight dropping low, the bioelectric field flaring bright at her shoulders. She crossed the chamber in 4 strides and hit the transparasteel hard enough to make the whole corridor shake. Every instinct I had told me to step back. I did not step back. I tilted my head to the side and raised one hand, palm open, the way you might greet someone across a crowded room. Not a submissive gesture, not a defensive one, just a hello. She stopped. Her face, broad and angular with those fractured amber eyes, was centimeters from the glass. She stared at me. I stared back. The bioelectric field crackled, and then, slowly, settled. She made a sound, low and resonant, somewhere between a hum and a vibration, the kind of frequency you felt in your back teeth more than heard with your ears. I hummed back. I have a terrible singing voice. My eldest sister once told me I sound like a broken appliance. Whatever note I produced, It was completely wrong and entirely human. The elder female was silent for a long moment. Then she sat down on the floor of the containment chamber. I heard the door of the observation room open behind me and turned to find Venolu, the Velkari male diplomat, standing in the entrance with the expression of someone who has just watched a person walk through fire and come out the other side holding a cup of tea. He was small compared to her, fine-featured, with pale plating and careful hands that he was currently pressing together in a gesture I had learned meant something between distress and prayer. I asked him who she was. He told me she was his mother. I asked him what she wanted. He looked at me like that was the strangest question anyone had ever put to him. I waited. He said, very quietly, that she had come because she had heard about the agreement being negotiated. The mining rights on Karath Prime's third moon, and that nobody had told him she was coming until she was already on the station. I asked him what was on Karath Prime's third moon. He did not answer right away. He looked through the transparasteel at his mother, who was still sitting on the floor, watching me with those amber eyes, and his expression did something complicated and painful. The burial ground of the first matriarchy, he finally said, 7 generations of elder females. The oldest site on any Velkari world, the place where, when a matriarch died, her carapace was returned to the stone so that her daughters and their daughters would always know where they came from. The cooperative wanted to mine it, and nobody had asked the women. I sat with that information for a moment. Then I told Venolu I was going in. He told me that was not possible, that she would kill me, that the bioelectric discharge alone could stop my heart, that every protocol said the chamber stayed sealed. I told him I needed a translation earpiece calibrated to female dialect, and that if he wanted to argue about protocol, he should go find someone whose job that was, because mine was keeping the peace, and right now, the piece was sitting on the other side of that glass looking like she had nothing left to lose. He got me the earpiece. The chamber door opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and I walked in, thermos in hand, and sat down on the floor, approximately 3 meters from Karath Sova, close enough to talk, far enough to be polite about it. She watched me sit. The field at her shoulders flickered. I said hello. The translator did its best with the female dialect, which was older and layered in ways the male dialect was not, more like music than speech, tonal shifts carrying meaning, the way emphasis carries meaning in English. The translation was rough, but she heard the shape of it. She asked me what I was. I told her I was human. I told her my name was Dara. She said the word slowly, the way you repeat something in a language you are learning. She asked why I was not afraid of her. I thought about that for a second, and then told her the truth, which was that I was a little afraid of her, but that being afraid of something had never felt like a good enough reason not to sit down next to it. I told her I had a mother who used to say that the only conversations worth having are the ones that make you nervous. Karath Sova was quiet. The field steadied. Then she spoke, not a short answer. A long one, and the translator struggled and skipped, and I filled in gaps with gesture and context and the expression on her face. And slowly, painstakingly, the story came through. She had been on the station for 3 days. No one had spoken to her directly. Food had been slid through a slot in the door. The cooperative's liaison had communicated only with Venolu and the other male delegates, because that was the established protocol, and the protocol was based entirely on the assumption that the males spoke for the clan in all matters. They did not. Not in matters of land. Not in matters of the dead. Not in matters that touched the sacred places that the matriarchs had held and kept and protected since before the Velkari had words for any of it. She had tried to tell them. She had knocked on doors. She had sent Venolu to speak for her. The response, each time, was that the female delegates were not party to the trade discussions and that the relevant permissions had been obtained from the appropriate representatives. So she had done the only thing left to her. She had made them understand that she was there. I looked at the gouges in the walls and thought that she had made a fair point. I told her I was going to need her help with something. She asked what. I told her we were going to walk into the assembly hall together. The silence that followed was long enough that I started to wonder if the translation had failed completely. Then Karath Sova looked at me with those fractured amber eyes and made the sound again, the low resonant thrum, and this time I understood from the tonal shift at the end that it was a question. I told her yes. I was serious. I told her that the cooperative was going to sign an agreement in approximately 4 hours that would give mining access to the burial ground, and that the only way to stop it was to walk into that room and make them listen, and that I would walk beside her the entire way. She studied me for a long moment. Then she said something that the translator rendered with a small but significant delay, as though it was searching for the right word in common speech for a concept it had not encountered before. She said, "You are strange, Dara." I told her I got that a lot. She stood, and I stood beside her, and we walked to the chamber door together. I want to describe what happened when we entered the Grand Assembly Hall, but the honest account is that it happened very fast. The doors opened. The 40-odd delegates inside turned, and then the room did what rooms do when Kareth Sova walks into them. It evacuated, not in a calm, orderly fashion, in the way that water leaves a bowl when you drop something heavy into it. Delegates from 11 species found urgent reasons to be anywhere else, some going through the proper exits and some, I noticed, simply pressing themselves against the back wall and hoping she would not look at them directly. She did not chase anyone. She walked with me to the center of the floor, her steps measured and deliberate, head high, and she sat when I sat, and the assembly hall of Station Meridian 9 held its breath. I spoke into the broadcast feed. I said my name and my rank, and I said that the being beside me was Elder Kareth Sova, of the Velkari First Matriarchy, and that she had been on this station for 72 hours, and that not one member of the Galactic Cooperative had asked her name. I said that this was going to change in the next few minutes, and that anyone who wanted to be part of the conversation that followed was welcome to take a seat. Drax Ka, the Cooperative's chief negotiator, a Vorith in full formal dress, with the bearing of someone who had never in his professional life been told no by anyone smaller than him, demanded from the doorway that I remove myself and the containment hazard from the proceedings immediately. Kareth Sova turned her head and looked at him. Drax Ka sat down. I had spent a long time not enjoying that moment. I enjoyed it a little. What followed was 3 hours that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Kareth Sova spoke. I translated what I could, and asked Venolu to fill the gaps, and he did so with the careful, quiet manner of a person who is simultaneously ashamed and relieved, as though something he had known was wrong for a long time was finally being said aloud by someone with the standing to say it. The burial moon was not available for mining. That was not a negotiating position. That was the end of it. But in the silence after she said it, she said something else. She said that the First Matriarchy had watched the cooperative ships scan Karath Prime for 2 seasons. She said they had seen what the cooperative was really looking for, which was energy, not minerals. She said that beneath Karath Prime's crust, in the deep geothermal network that the matriarchs had charted by hand over 400 years, there was enough thermal energy to power 3 full sectors for a century without touching a single gram of rock from any sacred ground. The cooperative had been negotiating for a handful of ore and had almost traded away something beyond measure in exchange for the one thing that was not for sale. The room was very quiet when she finished. Venolu translated a final passage that the earpiece had not caught clearly. He translated it slowly, looking at his mother, and she looked back at him with an expression I did not have the vocabulary for but recognized anyway. The kind of look that passes between a parent and a child when something difficult is finally said, and both of them survive it. He said, "She offers this not as trade. She offers it as the first word of a different kind of conversation, one that begins with both sides at the same table." Drax Ka looked at his counterparts. They looked at each other, and then, one by one, they sat down properly, not near the exits, not half facing the door, but at the table, and the session began in earnest. It took another 6 hours to reach a preliminary framework. Kareth Sova stayed for all of it. She ate twice. Real food that Venolu quietly arranged to be brought in, and she asked pointed questions through me that made several of the cooperative's legal delegates visibly uncomfortable, which I considered a positive sign. Near the end, when the framework was essentially settled and people were beginning to show the softened edges of exhaustion, she reached across the space between us and placed one armored hand, carefully, on my shoulder. The room tensed. Nobody moved. She said something short, 4 syllables in the older dialect. I asked Venolu. He was quiet for a moment, Then he said, "The closest translation is, recognized sister. It is what the matriarchs say to someone they have decided belongs to them." I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. I am a soldier of the Human Peacekeeping Corps, and I have sat in rooms with very difficult beings and kept a professional demeanor through all of it. But it was close. 2 days later, I was in the medical bay, getting the minor burns on my left hand treated. She had discharged during a particularly heated exchange in the later part of the session, not at anyone, just outward, the way a person might slam a hand on a table. I had been sitting closest. The burns were not serious. I considered them, privately, a kind of honor. The attending medic asked how I had done it. I told him I was not sure I had done anything, exactly. He said that was not an answer. I said it was the only honest one I had. People kept asking me that in the days that followed. The SINAF sent a research delegation that wanted samples of my biochemistry. The Voreth filed a formal inquiry with the Corps, asking whether humans had a classified neural suppression technique they had not disclosed. The Cooperative Xenopsychology Division published a preliminary paper suggesting that human fear responses were uniquely attenuated in ways that made us fundamentally non-threatening to species whose aggression was fear-triggered. All of that may be true. I have no idea. I am not a scientist. What I know is that I walked toward her because she was angry, and no one had bothered to ask why. Because the most dangerous thing in any room is usually the one everyone is trying not to look at. Because I grew up watching my mother navigate a world that underestimated her at every turn, and she did it by walking straight at whatever was in her way, and looking it in the eye, and refusing to be moved. I learned that from her. I suspect it is not uniquely human. I suspect it is just something that gets passed from one woman to another, across enough generations that it becomes a kind of instinct. A package arrived at my bunk on the 4th day. Venolu delivered it in person, holding it with both hands, and a formality that suggested the contents mattered significantly. Inside was a flat piece of stone, pale gray, carved with a pattern of interlocking lines that I recognized from the holographic image Kareth Sova had shown me of the burial ground. At the center of the pattern, 2 sets of marks that Venolu quietly explained were names, his grandmother's, and a new one, freshly cut. Mine. He said it was a grave token, that the elder females of the first matriarchy carved them for those they called kin, that to receive one was to be told, "You are remembered here. You belong to this ground as much as we do." I turned the stone over in my hands, and thought about a woman who had been locked in a room for 3 days, while people argued over the bones of her ancestors, and who had, in the end, chosen to trust the one person who had simply stopped and sat down next to her. I thought about my mother, who used to say that bravery and stubbornness look identical from the outside, and that the difference is something only you ever know. I set the stone on the table beside my bunk where I could see it when I woke up. The whole station is still afraid of Kareth Sova. She has that effect on people. She is 8 feet of armored fury, and she has the patience of someone who has been dismissed her entire life and is done with it. I am, apparently, her favorite person in this part of the galaxy. Honestly, I feel the same way about her.